With some construction catastrophes, the errors are blindingly obvious, even when they're hidden at the bottom of the sea. For this blunder, we head to Venice, Italy, where this ancient city is struggling to keep its head above water.
This engineering project gives me a sinking feeling.
It's an engineering catastrophe on an unprecedented level.
Disaster-wise, on a scale from 1 to 10, this was off the charts.
An underwater construction project that's struggling to stay afloat.
Unless something is done, Venice is in trouble.
Venice, Italy. This unique and iconic city was founded in the 5th century and lies on more than 100 islands in the Venetian lagoon. Environmental scientist Jane DeMosto has lived here for over 20 years.
Venice is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Venice has an architectural style that you can't find anywhere else in the world.
Built centuries ago, Venice is an engineering marvel. The foundations of it were built using wooden piles in marsh and sand, yet it still stands today as one of the world's most iconic cities.
Venice was built on millions of closely spaced wooden poles, 18 meters in length, hammered through soft mud into the solid clay below. Protected from oxygen, the wood doesn't rot, and in fact, thanks to the mineral-rich waters, becomes petrified or hard like stone. The foundation might be solid, but there's no getting away from Venice's low-lying and wet location.
Venice is on the ocean, and with these huge tidal surges and rising sea levels, it's a recipe for disaster.
Between autumn and spring, Venice experiences abnormally high tides, known as the acqua alta. These tides are made worse by strong seasonal winds. The impact can be devastating, something residents like engineer Vincenzo Di Tella know all too well.
When there is this tide, the Venice is completely flooded. So it's not possible for the normal activity. It's only possible to go with a boat inside the river, but you cannot go on the sea.
Tidal surges have long been a problem for Venice, but in 1966 it had the worst flood in recorded history, and the government finally decided something has to be done.
The Italian government pledged a solution, but it wasn't until the 1980s that the Mose project was conceived. Mose was named after the Old Testament prophet Moses, and like its namesake, the plan was to hold back the waters that were threatening to engulf Venice.
In the 1980s then, the Italian government began to prototype a tidal barrier that could rise when it was most needed when there were the largest tidal surges.
Mose would be an engineering project on a biblical scale.
They use that term still because of its reference to Moses, who parted the water, as though this engineering project is going to have the same kind of universal powers to defeat the physical forces of the world.
After decades of discussion, design, and prototyping, in 2003, the go-ahead to build the barrier was finally given. The aim of this ambitious project was to divide the Venetian lagoon from the Adriatic Sea by placing barriers across 3 inlets. A total of 78 mobile gates needed to be laid at the bottom of the seabed. Each one is 28 meters long, 20 meters wide, and weighs a colossal 300 tons.
Mose consists of a series of gates that lie flat on the seabed, and they're hinged at one end. And to activate them, air is pumped into the gates, and through the principle of buoyancy, the gates rise up, providing a barrier between the Venetian lagoon and the Adriatic Sea.
The design was revolutionary and would allow authorities to open and close the sea gates to cope with tidal surges of up to 2.7 meters. At least that was the plan. But to match the biblical scale of this project, the catalog of catastrophes has been almighty as well, becoming a joke amongst Venetians.
So what they didn't think about was that when the barrier's up, tidal forces can push sand and silt underneath the barrier, so it can't sink back down properly.
Engineers realized that when the gates were raised, sand would settle in the trenches, which meant that when the gates were shut, they couldn't close properly. The materials used in the construction of the barrier have already shown significant signs of wear.
Another really difficult problem is corrosion. The gates that were installed underwater are already showing huge signs of corrosion, and gates that haven't even been put in yet, that are on the land, are starting to rust. So this is going to render them much, much weaker and can lead to huge mechanical failures in the future.
The barriers are made out of these big metal panels, and the paint is being corroded. That's also something that, you know, is a well-known feature of salty water.
The gates are corroding, even the replacement gates are corroding. Clearly they chose materials that just couldn't withstand salt water and sea air.
To add insult to injury, a tiny Venetian resident is causing huge extra problems.
What they didn't also think about was the environment at the bottom of the sea. There's lots of mussels and all sorts of creatures down there, and they start to live on the brackets and the hinges, meaning that sometimes these hinges are inoperable.
There was some issue with the hinges, and lo and behold, there were mussels growing on the hinges.
And the only way to deal with that is to have divers go down and literally scrape them off, which just seems ridiculous.
All these massive oversights have Venetians up in arms.
They're still trying to finish building that was planned in the 80s and was supposed to be finished in 2011. And they recently said that the 31st of December due date might not be possible.
With no end in sight, this project also comes with a hefty and ever-growing price tag. Latest estimates take the budget to a whopping 5 billion euros, 3 times the original estimate.
It's already cost billions and it's not even finished, and to maintain it is going to cost 80 million euros a year. Surely someone knew from the start that this was not a good idea.
The Venice flood barrier is this ancient city's only hope against rising sea levels. But with so many problems, it appears that the focus of this project has not been on the engineering. As the lagoon slowly rises, so does the cost to fix it, while confidence in this flawed flood defense is falling. Residents like journalist Alberto Vitucci think money that continues to be spent on the project could potentially help the city of Venice in other ways.
Because the Moses, the great work, cannot save, for instance, San Mark Place, because Moses is only for high tides, not medium or regular tides. And San Marco is the lowest place in the city of Venice.
As it stands, the Mose project is set to proceed, but the reality of operating this barrier in the long term could be more trouble than it's worth.
A lot of money spent only for this work was a real disaster for Venice, because every year the city of Venice needs a lot of money for maintenance. Venice is a particular city. It lives in the water, but they thought only about Mose.
With the solution to the issues far from certain, it seems the Mose project has done a better job at dividing opinion than parting the sea.
This project has been going on for years, has been costing billions, and still has a lot of work left to go. But the tide is coming, and if Venice is to be saved, something must be done.
Many Venetians maybe thought that the Moses could stop the high number of tides. But now, looking at the works, the delays, the money, the problems, Venetians, I think they have enough of this project.
Let's hope the Italians come up with an engineering solution that will protect this iconic city.